Welcome to the Elaborate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Elaborate Topics. I'm your host for today's show, Stephanie Whitehead. Thank you for tuning in, and if you're tuning in for the first time, I'm your podcasting executive laboratory leader and co-host for the Elaborate Topics podcast. Elaborate Topics is a weekly podcast where myself or my co-host, or all of us, are bringing you topics related to the laboratory and leadership to help you excel inside and outside the laboratory. And I'm super excited for today's show because we have a very special topic for you guys. Called Managing Across Generations in the Laboratory. And here to help me talk about that topic with you guys is Ms. Christina Hampton. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. I've listened to your podcast, and it's really a pleasure.
Well, thank you. Thank you for listening in, and thank you for coming on the show. We're excited to get into this conversation, but before we do, why don't you introduce yourself to the guests and tell us a little bit about your background and your laboratory journey.
So I am currently an administrative director at a hospital in Westchester County, New York, and I got here, I've loved the laboratory from the minute I learned about it. I think I was very young. I had my first chemistry set in first grade, and then I got my microscope in second grade, and then I started learning about DNA, and I just fell in love. So from a very young age, science and laboratory science specifically, I've just pursued my whole life. So when I graduated high school and I went into the field, I went in as a bio major. I did not know about medical technology or clinical lab science. That none of those programs were ever publicized or brought to my attention. So I went through my track as a bio major. And in college, I needed, probably around my junior year, I needed to start working and getting some income. So I called every laboratory under the sun to see if they would hire me, and finally a laboratory hired me. I think my starting pay was $9 an hour as a lab assistant, and I was able to learn genetics. So I think on the interview they said, "Oh, do you know fish?" And I was like, "Sure, I could feed fish, no problem." And that wasn't the fish they were talking about. They were talking about fluorescent in situ hybridization, and I had no clue what that was. So I learned cytogenetics. I started there. I was there until I graduated, and then I moved over into a company in New York City, which is Genzyme, and I was there for 6 years. During that time, I started looking outside of genetics and trying to see what other opportunities there were, just because I wanted flexibility and I wanted to be able to have some sort of job security, and the field was very small and I wanted to expand my scope. So I started applying, and I got a position to start a clinical laboratory, from CLIA application all the way to full accreditation. And I did that within a year, and during that year I had to read tons of books on medical technology because I didn't know you had to spin an SST tube, since most of what I had worked with was fluids, bone marrows, or whole blood. So that was a whole different ball game for me. And then I moved on to a larger laboratory and learned more technology there and started really managing people there on the night shift, and then growing my scope to where I am today.
Wow, you've got a very vast and diverse laboratory background, so congratulations on all your accomplishments.
Thank you.
And today we're going to talk about a topic that you actually approached me with, which is managing employees from different generations in the laboratory. And so as we get into this discussion, tell me why you feel it's important to understand generational diversity when you're in the workplace, particularly if you're a leader.
So I became a leader very, very early on. I think I started as the night shift operations manager at night, and I was 37 years old, or 27 years old, sorry. I was 27 years old, and so majority of the people that I had managed were much older than me. I was probably the youngest person in the building at times, if not definitely the youngest manager. And so I struggled a lot with managing people, learning appropriate soft skills, not being coached to learn how to manage people at all times. And then I made a lot of mistakes along my management career. And so as I see newer employees coming to me looking for guidance on how they can grow their career and some coaching that way, I feel that it's important to recognize all of the people that are at different stages and come from different values and different age groups, and to understand that each section has to be managed differently and that they all have value. And the most frequent topic, which is why I sent it to you that day with Eureka moment, is, the gap that we have right now in the older generations in the laboratory. There's a few in between, and then there's a lot of millennials and younger coming into the field now. And so there's a lot of discord between the different generations, and being a manager that's kind of in between both, I've had to learn a little bit about every single type of generation and what their needs are to be able to facilitate a good operation.
So me and you have a similar background, because I got my first position in a leadership role when I was 25 years old. And it was, just like you said, it was very difficult because many of the people that I was managing or leading were older than me. They had more years of experience than I did. And it was difficult to motivate them and encourage them to follow my lead or listen to my suggestions, or even sometimes effectively communicate what needed to happen next, just because they didn't have that confidence and trust in me because of my age. And sometimes vice versa. It was hard for me to kind of break down the barriers and get around some of my own personal stereotypes because we weren't communicating well. So it did take a while for me also to understand how to effectively lead and guide, motivate, manage across different generations, because exactly what you said, as you age and as you're in different age groups, you're in different stages of life and different stages of what matters to you. And as you kind of grow, what matters to you is very different in different stages. And unless you can educate yourself on what the needs are across those generations, it's hard for you to understand how to effectively manage those people. So just for the benefit of all of our listeners who are out there and they are now intrigued and want to know more, what are the different, or can you describe to us the different generations in the workplace that you might encounter? There's, everything from, you kind of mentioned a couple, millennials, Generation X, and what are some of the unique characteristics and work expectations associated with each generation?
So right now there's about 5 to 6 generations in the workforce right now. And there's a lot of debate on how you define those generations, where you break them down. And there is some crossover. I know I told my mom I was a millennial, and she laughed at me. She's like, "You're a Gen Xer. There's no way you're a millennial." But, so there's a lot of debate on values and characteristics of each, and these are all generalizations, very much like horoscopes. I'm a Leo and I have this personality. So these are very much generalizations, and even their names on each one are debated. But you have the traditionalists, or the pre-boomers, or the great generation, which I have a few employees that are still in that bucket. I have baby boomers, and there's sometimes grouped 2 ways: early baby boomers and late baby boomers. And then you have your Generation X, millennials, and Gen Z. So The pre-boomers are from 22 to 45. The baby boomers are a large group between 46 and 64, and this is 1946 and 1964. Gen Xers are 1965 to 1980. Millennials, there's sometimes two waves. There's the first wave millennials, and this is, up for discussion. So it's the 1978 to 1989, and then you have second wave millennials, which are 1990 to 1996. And then you have the new generation, which is Gen Z, which is after 97 or 98.
Okay, and so for the audience, these are the years that you would be born. And then also, like Christina said, all of these things are characteristics. I love that you compared it to the horoscope, because sometimes you feel like that fits me, or if my brother is right on the edge of two horoscope zodiacs, and sometimes he feels one way and sometimes he feels another way. So you may be listening, and when you do your own research, you might say, I'm kind of Gen X with a little millennial tendencies, but what are some of the specific characteristics or maybe the work expectations from each one of these?
So I find that traditionalists or pre-baby boomers tend to be more independent. They want to come work, they want to get their job done, and they don't really like a lot of communication. I'll frequently touch base with some of the traditionalists that I've worked with, and I'm like, how's it going? And they're like, fine. And so breaking down communication with them, you really tend to have to engage them, because a lot of times they feel like people don't want to hear their opinion, or they tend to work independently and they don't really engage or share much. So some of the ways that I really engage traditionalists is asking them about their understanding. They have been in the workforce, in the laboratory for years. They've seen everything prior to automation and manual and timers and mouth pipetting and tasting urine for glucose measurements and things like that. And they've experienced all of that, plus all the growth of where we are now with automation and technology. So a lot of the times when I'm looking at a workflow or a work process, I engage them on how they feel, what they're doing, and what their input is based on their experience. Because they do have a lot of experience, they're just not forthcoming in providing that information. They very much.
I always find it so. I didn't mean to interrupt. I always find it so interesting when sometimes I talk to people in this age group, and they have the stories from back in the day. Like I have some employees that actually remember when they were allowed to smoke in the laboratory. Mm-hmm. And I have another employee that remembers because the hospital I work for now is attached to a university, and they have a school for health. So they remember sheep being in the back and then bleeding the sheep to make their own sheep blood agar for micro. So it could be very interesting to hear some of the ways that laboratory medicine has advanced, even in one's lifetime. But go ahead, Christina. Sorry.
Exactly. No. This is fun. So the traditionalists, when it comes to management, there's lots of viewpoints. The younger people are like, oh, they're slower, but they may be looking at things or working up things or understanding or processing things differently. And that has value, because just because I'm faster doesn't necessarily mean I'm better, right? And so understanding it as a manager and engaging the traditionalists with their experience. I was cleaning out the basement of the hospital, and there was a room there, and I found ledgers from the year I was born, handwritten ledgers on blood cultures and patient information. I brought it back to the lab with me, and I said, look at this. First of all, the handwriting is gorgeous. I've never seen such a thing. And then I showed it to one of the employees, and they're like, yeah, I did that one. And this is, the way that we used to log our results before all of those computers and things were in play, and how we track those results and trend them by patient, which was awesome for me to see. And so as they start to retire, because the fact that they haven't retired is astounding, and some of them truly love still working, and which is why they're still working, and they love what they do, and it keeps their brain engaged. Getting that information and talking to them on work processes, and so I know what works at 5 specimens doesn't work at 5,000 specimens, and tell me what the pieces that we're missing, and talk to me about why, or the mechanism behind how this works. And so really, as you start engaging them and showing them as a young manager that you value all of their experience, really does help across the board. It helps engage the traditionalists that really keep their head down. They don't, go outside of the hierarchy. It's the way that they've worked in the old way managing. You go through, your chain of command, and, you have a procedure and you follow that procedure, and that's your role. And if you're not in a management role, you really don't speak up. And things in the lab are changing. So, trying to get them to engage and participate in the processes and procedure reviews and things like that, so that we don't lose that valuable knowledge, was really a struggle. Because, you first go up to somebody and go, tell me why you're in the field, and tell me about how it used to be. And at first they get disrupted because they don't expect you to ask those questions as a young person, and making sure that you don't lose that knowledge and those skills and those values. The next group, for baby boomers, those are your people that, came into the field right out the gate, like those horses that came running. And we have a lot of baby boomers in our field, both in first and second wave. And I think this is where clinical laboratory technology and this group of people have really pushed the field forward. So they were really the drivers in innovation. They were the first ones to start looking at Coulter counters and things like that, and being able to watch the technology develop, and also watch, the manual intervention to get it there to where it is automated today. A lot of them had struggled during the recession in 2008. Their plans of retirement at 65, because the baby boomers are like, I'm retiring at 65 for most of their career, and things had changed, and they were affected by it. Not only financially, but, with organizations merging, laboratories closing, the reduction in reimbursements, the loss of stability in healthcare in general over the last few years, when it comes to laboratory medicine and how we maintain operations and keep that stuff going, with reductions in payments and resources, really challenge them. And so their concerns of making sure that I have what I need at this stage in my life. Most of their children are grown, if they have children, or, they have different ideas of, I've put in my dues, and these are the things, that I need, and I'm worried if I get sick, and can I retire, and all of these things personally are going through them while they're at work. And so engaging them, understanding what their needs are at this time, and then looking at your work processes and what you can offer to give stability to them. And then they work harder, and they know that you value their experience, and that, you want to hear what they have to say, and that they're still relevant and valuable, and that you'll work with them when they need something. The next generation would be Generation X. And so I feel like the Zodiacs, that I really fall a lot in this. These are the Generation X's that are that sandwich generation where, they left with student loans. They have children that they're supporting. Very frequently, they'll support their parents at the same time, so they're kind of in the middle. So they have to balance a lot of responsibilities, and sometimes that can be distracting in the workplace, yet they want to grow their career so that they can still continue to support their family and get that satisfaction, that job satisfaction that they're really striving for. They were really the first ones to challenge the traditional management style of, this is the way it is, and this is the procedure, and you got to follow it. They started asking a lot of the questions. So those are the people that will challenge the situation and will say, why do we do it this way, and how do we do it this way, and how can we make this better? So those are your innovation generation people. And so the challenge with some of them is that they don't have the history behind a lot of what they do, because they're past the innovation state in lab medicine. They're past the manual process, while there's still some manual processes, but now they're driving forward. And sometimes mistakes are made because they don't have that history or that value, and, trying to show them where to go and how to leverage both sides and other people to get all the information to make good decisions is definitely how I tend to manage Generation X. Millennials, they are your Fast and the Furious. They were really born in the technology age. Very few, if any of them, as well as Gen Z, don't know life without technology. Some of them don't know what it's like not to have a cell phone, or the internet, or the computer, for example. And so they missed out on a lot of the methodologies behind what we do, right? So in school they teach you it, but linking y equals mx plus b to a calibration is challenging for them. That equation that you learned in algebra in 9th grade is what you do every day. That is your calibration. That's how you get your values, and that is what you live and die by in the lab. So they feel that they accomplished a task and that they're done, and that, okay, I can do this really good. And so with them, they're missing the benefit of understanding the behind it and not moving forward. So it's challenging for them sometimes to take it to the next level with troubleshooting or things like that, because they're not looking at the theory behind what they're doing. So that's like in a short a state of what my impressions are based on my research and experience on the different generations and how they kind of, I manage them a little differently and try to kind of get them to leverage each other with the different values that they bring to the table.
And it sounds like, just having that minimal understanding, that basic understanding of what everybody's vantage point is based on, like we said, what stage they are in life and when they were born and versus when they entered the laboratory field could be, to me, helpful in strengthening your team. It sounds like if we could all, really master the art of cross-generational mentoring. Some of our millennials might be super fast at doing a task and be able to assist some of the more experienced generations in their speed, but like you said, they may not. Just because you have speed doesn't mean you have accuracy or precision, or you even have the knowledge as to why, machines or things are functioning in that way. And so millennials can learn in reverse from those generations as to like the background and applying some of the things you learn in school or some of the things you study to get your certification to, what's really going on the job. And then, for me, what's really helped me, like I said, I entered the management field at a really young age like yourself, was basically continuously encouraging feedback. from all of my different employees. And like I said, just because you fall into one of these buckets doesn't mean you necessarily have those characteristics. So I want to have a basic understanding of, the majority of the people who might be in that age bracket, but that might not be you. So I don't want to stereotype a person. So just having one-on-ones and doing employee rounding and encouraging feedback, to me, was a really helpful management style. And I would give that tip to anybody out there listening, that rounding with your employees and really trying to get to know your employees, get to know what motivates them, get to know what encourages them to do better and what some of their future plans are and how you can help them succeed will help you across any of these generations. So I'd like to ask you, Christina, what are some of the management styles or tips that you use in your department as you're managing across some of these generations?
So what really was a crossroad in my management style was I was doing really well operationally, checking all the boxes. Oh, I improved efficiency by 95%, and I did this by 100%, and our productivity has increased by 40%. And so on paper, I was doing really good. And then it came time for my review. And they said, while you're, accomplishing all your tasks, you do great presentations, you have data analysis, you're doing all the right things on paper, you really need to work on your communication. And so it was kind of left like that. And as a scientist, I'm a very analytic person. I think in numbers and graphs and charts. And so I had a hard time saying to myself, how do I fix this? And how do I understand it in the way that I think to make it better, right? So I started reading management books and reading all kinds of different authors and ideas, and I took a DISC test. I took a DISC personality test. I was like, that's an analytic-based system that I can try to see what my problem is. So I took a DISC personality test, and no surprise, I was dominant and cautious. I had no sensitive or intuitive at all. Like, that was just 100% zero. And so I reflected on myself a lot, and I had thought that I would personally try to change and get to know my employees and actually care about it, right? But you can't just walk up to somebody that go, hey, I need this done, and we'll be good, and then all of a sudden go and sit down and go, hey, how's it going? What's new? How's your family? So I wanted to approach my staff and let them know that I recognized I needed improvement. And that's a really hard thing to do, is to sit in front of your staff and make yourself vulnerable and say, I know I need work and I'm going to work on it and I need your help to fix it. But it went a long way, and I got a lot of good feedback on it. And I wasn't perfect, and I didn't change everything. But the perception from my staff, understanding that I know I'm not perfect and I need help to get there, really went a long way with all generations, honestly. Nobody likes a manager that just thinks they're right all the time, or, that doesn't admit their flaws. And so when I met with my staff members of all generations, majority of them commended me for admitting it and being vulnerable enough to say it to them. So that was huge. So that's how I overcame that perception of not being two-faced, right? You don't want to be the two-faced boss that 1 minute is, here, I need this done, and the next minute, fishing, because then it's not authentic. So I came across an author called Bruce Tulgan, and he very much, in plain words, easy to understand, had this series of management style books. And so I started reading It's Okay to Be the Boss, and how to be the boss, and how to manage every day, and how if you only manage by crises, or if you only manage by tasks, that it doesn't go anywhere with any generation. But he did a lot of work on generational changes, and it's not so much the year that you're born that dictates what kind of employee you are, but the year that you're born. And as you progress in life, that's where you're going to fall. So it's more like life stages. But these generations also come out with different values based on what they've had access to in their life experience. And so understanding that history is lost over time if it's not captured by the younger staff, and getting those younger staff members to engage those older staff members and do research is important. Some of the things that I benefited from not having a filtered education is I was reading history books that were no longer relevant, but that helped me link the history of the innovation to what's here, and forced me to think more critically about it. And so I try to share that I didn't have necessarily the dictated resources that the millennials and the Gen Zs and even some of the Gen Xs had. So I had to figure it out differently, and how that benefits everybody if you try to figure things out differently. I have a Punnett square of behavior and performance. So I do like my cross-pollination grid, and that's how I manage that way. And then I started reading other books like Bridging the Soft Skills Gap and what people need at different stages of their life. Things that are very personal books, but that help you engage your staff members. And as I started doing all of these reading and then talking, I started truly understanding that it's just not a numbers game. It's not. It's not about, what your productivities are or what your volume is. It's about something deeper than that. And if you connect with your staff members and you learn more about their experiences, both personally and professionally, that you make a larger impact on each other as well as patient care, because then you get more of the history and you learn more faster.
I love that you did so much in-depth research, and you did so much self-assessment, because I really think, as a leader, it's important that you continue to assess where you are so you understand, where your weaknesses are, and you can continue to improve on those. You can't improve on, what you're not, self-aware about. So I love that you did so much research and read so many books, and really just tried to increase your own knowledge throughout your management career. I, too, took a DISC test, and what's funny is I took the test when I was working at two different organizations, one very early in my career, and like I said, kind of right out the gate of graduating, and I worked a couple of years as a tech, and then I went into management, and I was a complete I. It just is like my personality. I was very outgoing, and I wanted to manage through friendships, and I thought, if we're all friends, then the CAP inspection will just come, and the quality and QC will just come, and, it'll all just fall in line if we all, have potlucks, and, if there's, the birthday luncheons and things like that. And so, I have evolved. And then what's funny is now, a little bit over 10 years later, then I'm married. I have 2 kids. I've been in management for about 13 years. I've been in the laboratory field for over 15 years. I'm more of a D and an S. And it just goes to show you how, as your life changes and you grow more life experiences, not that you change as a person, but you just develop different skills on how to adapt to different situations. And I think you just become stronger as a manager or as a leader. And so because you've done so much research and because you have so much knowledge on the subject, we know that, the generations have these innate differences, but what are some of the things that all the generations and really all people have in common? I think, there was is it Milo's pyramid of wants and needs? What's the pyramid of wants and needs?
Mm-hmm. So I find that every single person wants to be appreciated and valued. Those are the 2 number one things that they want to feel.
Completely agree.
Their work is valued and that they're appreciated for what they do. I think the next underneath that is really making sure that, they're successful. Everyone wants to feel successful. Like, nobody wants to feel like they're coming to work and failing every day. So job satisfaction is probably the second aspect of it. And then understanding, exactly what their work-life balance is. They want their employer to understand that sometimes there's obligations that are outside of their control, and work with them. Some of the millennials specifically, and a little bit of the Gen Zs, watched their parents, and maybe some of the Gen Xers too. They were latchkey kids. Their parents worked 20 years in a field and worked really hard and worked their way up chain of command and spent all these years investing in a company only to be laid off around 2008, 2009. I was one of those people that watched my mom work for a publishing company for 20 years, only people aren't reading books anymore, and it's all digital, and the company ended up getting sold, and then her facility was dissolved. So when you watch your parents invest so much time and struggle and then get laid off, and then that there's not much stability since then, right? It's a struggle and it's a challenge. So, to feel secure in your job is important, and to understand that there's also flexibility if something happens as well. So some people say that job security and flexibility are two different things, but I think that it's, in my personal opinion, a very shared concept, because you want to know that when you need that flexibility, you can have it, and that you have that security behind it, right? And that your employer is willing to work with you when you need it. Specifically, like if your child is sick or if you need a surgery. I mean, we have all these job protections and FMLA and disability, but I think they want to feel that beyond those federal regs, that there's security and flexibility there.
I totally agree. And I think, it's important to understand that as a leader, that the days of people working a lifetime employment are gone. And so if you're a leader who is in that generation where you're used to people, working in the laboratory, in the same laboratory department for 20 years and then retiring, and so therefore when you get employees that are perhaps millennial or Gen Xer and they're, wanting to promote quicker, or they're, leaving your department for another opportunity, that you don't feel slighted by that, but you just embrace that, sometimes the generational viewpoint of how to advance in your career and how to advance in your work, and the perception of work-life balance may be different. And so when you have a diverse team, how do you help your team see the benefits of each other? So bridging that generational gap between your team and ensuring that everybody is working together for that same common goal.
So say I have an operational issue with a procedure, and it's not specific to any person, but it seems to be just an operating issue that may affect more than one process. I tend to meet with everybody individually when it's something that I have to get involved in, to understand their perception or their perspective, and ask like the 10 whys, although I try to stay away from whys because people think it's accusatory. So I try to say, how come this is the case? And that's just some of the things that I've learned, my management style is also changing word choice. But how come this is the way it is? And then how come that was the way it is? And just keep going down the list of questions till I get something there. And then I'll meet with the younger staff member and I'll say, how come? And usually I'm able to detect gaps on like the older employee and the younger employee. And I know the older employee has the answer to the one question, but then I know the younger employee has the answer to the other question. And so I'll take that information back, and I know it affects more than one staff member, so I'll bring it up and I'll attend a staff meeting, and I'll say, here's the issue, and here's the outcome. And now all the staffers have already had all the questions and thought about all the answers, and so I'll engage typically the younger staff member because they're usually quicker to talk up and provide their input. And so I'll be like, okay, talk about this. And I'll be like, well, does anybody have the answer to the third question? And then the older staffer. And so then it starts them in a question debate and it usually goes further than the issue itself and trickles into different questions that the younger staff member may have or different suggestions from the older staffer. And that starts the conversation. But you have to continue that conversation specifically at your monthly meetings. Like, it can't just be, here's the agenda and the uniform policy and the attendance policy and this policy change. Like, you have to make your meetings engaging. Leveraging technology now, I started employee engagement meetings via Zoom, and this is where I can get multiple people on multiple shifts to log in at the same time and have more of a cross-functional and cross-generational input. And so as we start talking through it, I for the most part have an idea of where we need to go, usually, and I get their input, and I don't offer my solution by no means. I let them work with it together, and then I find that typically that helps the operation work better.
I think that's a great method. That's a great method. So as we wrap up our conversation, I like to ask our guests what advice or tips or tidbits can you leave for our listeners that they can use in their professional lives so that the podcast isn't really just us talking, but they can take things away and put them into action in their laboratory lives?
So there's a couple of things, right? Recognizing that each individual generation or person, no matter what their age is, has value, and it's fishing out that value as a manager. That's your responsibility. And the other thing is reflecting on yourself and finding tools that help you understand how to cross those bridges that you may not necessarily have either understood or that are uncomfortable, and trying to find ways, like I did, in an analytic way to understand soft skills and admit your flaws and ask for help. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've asked my traditionalists or my millennials, like, where I need help, I'm stuck, and I need your input, and that works better than anything else. And then I really like, all the reading I've done with Bruce Tulligan, and there's many others, so feel free to reach out, and I'll give you all of my book lists. It would be really fun to have that conversation.
And speaking of reach out, how can the listeners reach out to you and connect with you if they want to know more about your books or some of the research you've done, or just more about your management style or your management tips?
I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Christina Hampton, so it's CHRISTINA, Hampton, HAMPTON, or you can email me at ChristinaHampton11@gmail.com.
Well, thank you so much, Christina, for joining me today. And thank you to our listening audience for tuning into our show with our special guest, Christina, as she shared with us her tips for managing across generations in the laboratory. If you like what you heard today and you want to listen to some of our previous shows, you can subscribe at directimpactbroadcasting.com. Remember to email us at elaboratetopics@directbroadcasting.com to learn more about this topic or others, or just to be a guest on the show, or to maybe give us some of your feedback or your comments. We like to hear from our guests that are tuning in, so we can make sure that we're curtailing the show to make sure that we're meeting your needs. You can always follow me at Stephanie Whitehead on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Please tune in next week to hear another amazing episode of Elaborate Topics. And until then, have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elaborate Topics. where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on directimpactbroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.